The first thing I heard when I pushed open the door to Studio B was my wife laughing in a way I had not heard her laugh with me in months, breathless and low, followed by a man's voice saying, "Relax, sweetheart. Your husband thinks you're at a fundraising dinner until 10. I stood in the dim hallway of the private wellness club where I worked, holding the stainless steel water bottle Natalie had forgotten on our kitchen counter that morning. Through the narrow window in the studio door, I could see her pressed against the mirrored wall with both hands wrapped around a man I recognized immediately. His name was Richard Caldwell. He was 52 years old, 19 years older than me, and 20 years older than my wife. 3 months earlier, Natalie had introduced him as a potential investor for the boutique interior design firm where she worked. At that moment, his expensive navy blazer was lying across one of my foam rollers, his wedding ring finger was buried in her hair, and my wife's cream blouse was hanging open while she kissed him like the building belonged to them. My name is Ethan Mercer. I was 33 then, a fitness trainer in Denver, and I had spent nearly a decade teaching people how to stay calm while their bodies screamed at them to stop. Nothing in my career prepared me for what happened inside my own body that night. My pulse hammered so violently behind my eyes that the room seemed to flash with every heartbeat. My fingers went numb around the bottle. Acid climbed into my throat, and for several seconds I genuinely thought I might collapse right outside that door and give them the humiliation of stepping over me on their way out. Then Richard pulled away from her and said, "You're sure he never comes down here on Thursdays?" Natalie smiled and answered, "Ethan trusts me. That's his best quality and his biggest weakness." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, because catching your spouse cheating is one kind of pain, but hearing her describe your loyalty as a defect is something else entirely. It rearranges every memory you thought belonged to both of you. I had been married to Natalie for 6 years, and until that winter, I would have told anyone we were solid. We had met at a charity stair climb at Republic Plaza when she was 25 and I was 26. She had mocked my neon green running shoes, I had pretended to be offended, and 3 hours later we were eating tacos on Larimer Street while she still wore her participant number pinned crookedly to her shirt. We bought a narrow brick townhouse near Sloan's Lake 4 years into the marriage. We talked about children in that cautious way couples do when they think time is guaranteed. But by the time I found her with Richard, I had already spent 2 months explaining away signs that should have been impossible to ignore. Natalie had started coming home smelling faintly of cedar cologne, which she blamed on clients who hugged too much. She had replaced the bright dresses she normally wore to work with fitted black outfits and expensive heels, then rolled her eyes when I told her she looked beautiful. She stopped meeting me for our Sunday breakfasts at Rupert's, claiming her firm had landed a demanding hotel renovation. Her favorite excuse became Richard's name. Richard needed a revised concept board. Richard wanted to see imported stone samples. Richard had invited the design team to drinks at the Brown Palace. Whenever I asked why a private investor was involved in so many daily decisions, Natalie's face hardened as if I had accused her of something obscene. "He understands how business works," she told me one evening while removing a pair of gold earrings I had never seen before. "Not everybody clocks out after counting sets and wiping down benches." That comment stayed with me because Natalie had never belittled my work before. I trained executives, recovering athletes, firefighters, and ordinary people trying to feel comfortable in their own bodies again. I earned a good living, and I loved what I did. But Richard had money, a silver Porsche, a condo in Vail, and the kind of age that Natalie had recently started calling experience. 2 weeks before I caught them, she had even said over dinner, "Older men just seem more certain of themselves. They've already figured out who they are." I laughed and asked whether 33 made me a teenager. She did not laugh back. Standing outside Studio B, I finally understood that she had not been making conversation. She had been comparing us in real time. Every instinct in me wanted to slam open the door, drag Richard away from her, and demand an explanation neither of them could possibly give. My hand touched the metal handle. Then I heard Natalie say, after I talked to Ethan about selling the townhouse, "We won't have to keep sneaking around." Richard answered, "Don't rush it. I told you I need things settled on my end first." Something in the way he said my end stopped me. It was not affectionate. It was careful. Almost rehearsed. I lowered my hand and took one quiet step backward. That was the moment I made the most important decision of my life, I was not going to confront them while they still controlled the information. I moved down the hallway, entered the staff office, and sat in front of the security monitor. The club's cameras did not record inside the private studios, but they covered every entrance and corridor. I pulled up the feed from 10 minutes earlier and watched Richard enter through the underground garage using a temporary guest pass. Natalie arrived 3 minutes later. They had not walked in together. They knew enough to separate their arrivals, which meant this was not spontaneous and certainly was not their first time. I used my phone to record the screen as they appeared one after another, then forwarded the clip and the timestamp to a private email account Natalie did not know existed. After that, I walked back to my truck, placed her forgotten water bottle on the passenger seat, and stared through the windshield at the lights along Spear Boulevard. My entire marriage had just split open, but the strangest detail was that I could still see a half-peeled sticker of a cartoon avocado on the bottle. Natalie had put it there during our honeymoon in Santa Fe. 6 years of marriage, reduced to a stupid smiling avocado and a woman who believed my trust made me weak. If you have ever discovered that someone was living two versions of the same life, you already know how unnatural the next few minutes feel. The city keeps moving. Traffic lights change. People carry groceries across parking lots. Somewhere, somebody is laughing over dinner, while you are sitting completely still because the person you planned your future with has become a stranger without physically changing at all. I drove home before Natalie and put the bottle back on the kitchen counter exactly where she had left it. Then I showered, warmed up the chicken and rice I had prepared that afternoon, and turned on a Nuggets game. At 10:17, the garage door opened. Natalie came inside wearing the same cream blouse, buttoned now, with her hair pulled into a neat ponytail. "God, that dinner dragged," she said, dropping her purse onto a chair. The donors would not stop talking. I looked directly at her and asked, "Did Richard attend?" She paused for less than a second. "For the first hour." "Why?" "No reason. You've mentioned him a lot lately." She opened the refrigerator and kept her back toward me. "Because he's funding the project, Ethan. Please don't make this weird." I almost admired how easily she did it. No trembling voice. No guilty confession. She poured sparkling water into a wineglass, kissed my cheek, and asked whether the Nuggets had one. I could still smell Richard's cologne beneath her perfume. "They're ahead by 6, I said. "You hungry?" She told me she had eaten at the fundraiser. I knew she had been 20 feet away from a vending machine full of protein bars. That night she slept beside me with one hand under her pillow while I stared into the darkness and counted her breaths. At 2:11 in the morning, her phone illuminated the nightstand. She grabbed it immediately, but not before I saw a notification consisting of a single letter. Natalie read the message, deleted it, and rolled back toward me. I kept my breathing slow. By sunrise, I had accepted that whatever man she thought she knew was gone. I was not going to scream. I was not going to beg. And I was not going to warn Richard that he had stepped into the wrong marriage. Over the next 4 days, I wore normalcy like a uniform. I made Natalie coffee in the morning. I asked about her hotel project. I suggested we spend the following weekend in Breckenridge, and she said she might have to work. Whenever she lied, I filed away the exact wording. The hardest part was not anger. It was resisting the old reflex to care for her. On Saturday, she complained that her neck hurt, and my hands almost moved automatically to massage it because I had done that hundreds of times. I stopped myself by gripping the edge of the counter and asking whether she wanted ibuprofen instead. Meanwhile, I quietly separated everything that could be separated. I downloaded 12 months of statements from our joint checking and savings accounts. I photographed the title paperwork for the townhouse. I changed the passwords to my personal business accounts and backed up every client contract connected to my independent training work. Natalie and I had purchased the house together, but the $72,000 down payment had come from an inheritance my grandfather left me, and I still had the transfer records. I did not move joint money or hide anything. I simply made copies. Then I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney named Priya Shah whose office overlooked Union Station. I told Natalie I had a continuing education seminar. Priya listened without interrupting while I described what I had seen. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "Colorado is a no-fault state, so the affair itself won't deliver the courtroom punishment people imagine. What matters is protecting your assets, documenting any misuse of marital funds, and not giving her a reason to claim you threatened or intimidated her." "So I keep acting normal?" I asked. "You keep acting lawful," she said. "Normal is optional." Priya's investigator found the first crack in Richard Caldwell's polished story within 48 hours. His investment company existed, but he did not own it outright as he had implied to Natalie. His wife, Evelyn Caldwell, held 51%. They had been married for 23 years. Their primary home was a $2.4 million property in Cherry Creek, and there was no public divorce filing, no legal separation, and no evidence that Evelyn had moved out. Richard had also used a company card at the Jacquard Hotel on 7 separate afternoons matching dates Natalie had claimed to be meeting contractors. Four charges were followed by transfers from our joint account to Natalie's personal credit card, always in amounts between $300 and $600. She had been buying clothing, meals, and gifts for their affair with money that belonged to both of us. But Richard's marriage was not the strangest thing the investigator found. He gave me a photograph taken outside a restaurant in Greenwood Village. Richard was walking beside an elegant dark-haired woman in a camel coat, his hand resting on the small of her back. "That's Evelyn," the investigator said. "They attended a foundation dinner together last Friday. Whatever he's telling your wife, he is still publicly married and living with this woman." I looked at the photograph for a long time. Evelyn appeared to be in her mid-40s, composed and self-assured, with none of the defeated energy I had expected from a neglected spouse. Richard was smiling beside her exactly the way he smiled in every business profile I had found online. That was when the outline of my revenge began to form. I did not want to ruin Richard anonymously and let Natalie recast herself as another victim of his lies. I wanted the relationship she had chosen to turn against her from the inside. I wanted her to experience every layer of deception she had forced on me, and I wanted the truth to arrive from the one person Richard could not dismiss as a jealous husband. So I wrote Evelyn a short email from the private account. I did not accuse her husband in dramatic language. I introduced myself, explained where I worked, and attached one still image showing Richard entering the club 3 minutes before Natalie. I wrote, "I believe your husband and my wife are having an affair. I have more information, but I will not send anything explicit without your consent. If I am mistaken, I apologize. If I am not, you deserve to know before either of them makes financial decisions that affect us." Then I pressed send. For 9 hours, nothing happened. At 8:36 that evening, while Natalie sat across from me scrolling through tile samples and pretending to plan our future kitchen, my private inbox received a reply. Evelyn wrote, "You are not mistaken. Please do not confront them yet. Richard thinks I know nothing, and your wife believes he is leaving me. Both assumptions are useful. Can you meet tomorrow?" Let me pause here, because this was the point where revenge stopped being an angry fantasy and became an alliance. I had expected a devastated stranger. What I found instead was a woman who had already noticed money moving, lies multiplying, and a husband becoming careless. The next afternoon, I met Evelyn Caldwell at a quiet coffee shop on South Pearl Street. She arrived precisely at 1 o'clock wearing the same camel coat from the photograph. Up close, she looked around 46, with sharp brown eyes and a calmness that reminded me of someone standing in the center of a storm because she had finally stopped pretending the weather was fine. She did not cry. She did not ask whether Natalie was prettier than she was. She placed a slim folder on the table and said, "Richard told your wife he was divorcing me, didn't he?" "I haven't seen their messages yet," I said, "but that's what I suspect." Evelyn gave a humorless smile. "He cannot divorce me without losing control of the company, the Cherry Creek house, and most of the social credibility he uses to attract investors. Our prenuptial agreement has an infidelity clause tied specifically to company ownership. He knows that." She opened the folder and showed me copies of documents I did not fully understand, but one fact was perfectly clear: Richard's glamorous older man fantasy depended on Evelyn remaining his wife. Natalie believed she had found a wealthy, sophisticated man who would replace her younger fitness trainer husband with a more luxurious life. In reality, Richard's wealth, influence, and even the Vale condo he had promised to share with her were largely connected to the woman sitting across from me. "Why haven't you confronted him?" I asked. Evelyn stirred her coffee once and set down the spoon. "Because 3 months ago, Richard convinced me to approve a restructuring agreement that would have weakened my voting control. I delayed signing because his behavior changed. If he learns I know about the affair, he'll protect himself. I need him confident for another 2 weeks." Then she looked directly at me. "And you need your wife to keep believing he's available." That should have disturbed me. Instead, it felt like the first honest conversation I had experienced in months. Evelyn proposed that we share information, preserve evidence, and let Richard and Natalie accelerate their own plans. She would stop questioning his absences. I would encourage Natalie to discuss selling our townhouse. If either cheater believed resistance was disappearing, they might reveal what they truly intended to do. "There is one condition," I said. "Natalie doesn't walk away thinking Richard was the only liar. She made choices. She used our money. She mocked my trust while she was in his arms." Evelyn studied me for a moment and replied, "Then we make sure they each hear the full truth from the person they were lying about." We shook hands across the table. Hers was cool and steady. Mine was not. Over the following week, Natalie became almost cheerful. She interpreted my calmness as surrender before I had even raised a fight. When she casually mentioned that the Denver housing market might be favorable, I said, "Maybe we should get the townhouse valued." Her eyes brightened so quickly that she had to look away. That same night, she spent 40 minutes in the bathroom messaging Richard. Evelyn later forwarded me a screenshot from his synced tablet. Natalie had written, "He's considering selling. Once my half is liquid, I'll finally be free." Richard replied, "That's my smart girl. You deserve a man who can give you a bigger life." Then, after 3 minutes, he added, "Just don't pressure me about dates. Evelyn is emotionally fragile, and I need to handle the separation carefully." Evelyn attached one sentence beneath the screenshot: "Emotionally fragile is apparently what he calls the person preparing to remove him from his own company." I laughed for the first time since the night at the club. It was not a happy laugh, but it reminded me that I was still capable of something besides nausea. Evelyn and I began meeting every few days, sometimes at the coffee shop, sometimes during walks around Washington Park where we could talk without leaving a trail of restaurant receipts. Our alliance was supposed to be mechanical: evidence, timing, legal strategy. But conversations stretched beyond the plan. She told me Richard had spent years treating her age as a flaw even though he was 6 years older than she was. He surrounded himself with younger employees, younger clients, younger women, then described it as staying energetic. Natalie, at 32, apparently believed being desired by a 52-year-old millionaire made her unusually mature. Evelyn understood the irony better than anyone. "He doesn't want a mature woman," she said as we walked past the boathouse one gray afternoon. "He wants a younger woman impressed by things I helped him build." I told her about Natalie's remark that older men knew who they were. Evelyn stopped walking and laughed. "Richard changes personalities depending on who is in the room. Your wife didn't find a man who knows himself. She found a man with better tailoring." Our age difference was 13 years. I was 33, and Evelyn was 46. At first, it existed only as an unspoken contrast to Natalie's fantasy. She had chased a man 20 years older because she associated age with power, while I was slowly discovering that Evelyn's appeal had nothing to do with money or status. She listened. She noticed details. She spoke without performing. When she asked how I was sleeping, she waited for the real answer. I began looking forward to our meetings, then felt guilty for looking forward to anything connected to the destruction of 2 marriages. One evening, rain pushed us beneath the awning of a closed bookstore on Broadway. Evelyn stood close enough that I could smell citrus in her perfume. She looked at me and said, "We need to be careful, Ethan. Pain creates counterfeit intimacy." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. That's why I'm being careful. Neither of us touched the other. That restraint made the moment feel more dangerous, not less. Before we separated, Evelyn handed me another printout from Richard's tablet. It showed a message Natalie had sent that morning. I told my office I may relocate before the end of the year. Once Ethan signs the listing agreement, we can finally start planning Vale. Richard had responded with a heart and nothing else. Evelyn watched my face as I read it. There's more, she said. Richard booked a suite for Friday. Your wife thinks he's taking her there to discuss their future. And what is he actually doing? I asked. Evelyn's expression tightened. I found emails to a second woman in Boulder. Richard has been seeing her for at least 8 months. Natalie isn't his new life, Ethan. She isn't even his only affair. That revelation should have satisfied me. Instead, it made the entire situation colder. Natalie had burned down our marriage for a man who was cheating on both his wife and his mistress, and on Friday night, she was walking into a hotel suite expecting a promise he had already made to someone else. Evelyn closed the folder and said, "We can expose him now, or we can let Natalie find out in the most convincing way possible." I knew exactly what she meant. Richard had built his life by placing women in separate rooms and telling each one a different story. Evelyn wanted to open all the doors at once. And this time, Natalie would be standing in the center when they did. Friday arrived with wet snow drifting over Denver, the kind that melted against the pavement and turned every streetlight into a blurred yellow halo. Natalie left our townhouse at 6:20 wearing a fitted burgundy dress beneath a long wool coat. She told me her design team was hosting out-of-town suppliers at Garden Grace, then kissed the air beside my cheek as if even touching me had become an inconvenience. "Don't wait up," she said. "These dinners always run late." I stood in the kitchen and watched through the window as her rideshare pulled away. 10 minutes later, Evelyn parked around the corner in a dark gray Volvo. I climbed into the passenger seat carrying a folder containing the banking records, photographs, and security footage we had collected. Evelyn had arranged the rest with a level of precision I would have found frightening if she had not been aiming it at the people who betrayed us. Richard's suite was at the Halcyon in Cherry Creek. He believed Natalie would arrive at 7. What he did not know was that Evelyn had contacted the second woman, a 38-year-old commercial broker named Camille Reeves, and shown her enough evidence to earn her cooperation. Camille had believed Richard was separated too. He had promised her that his divorce would be finalized by spring. She was furious, but unlike Natalie, she had no financial plans tied to him and no desire to defend the fantasy once the facts appeared. Evelyn told Camille to message Richard at 6:45 and say she was nearby with a surprise. Richard, apparently convinced he could manage women like appointments on a calendar, told her to come upstairs for 20 minutes. Natalie was still 15 minutes away. Evelyn and I waited in the hotel lobby near a gas fireplace while Camille took the elevator to the 5th floor. She wore a white pantsuit and carried a small overnight bag because she wanted Richard to believe she intended to stay. At 6:58, she texted Evelyn 2 words, "He bought it." Natalie entered the lobby at 7:06. She did not notice us behind a tall arrangement of winter branches. She checked her reflection in the mirrored elevator doors, smoothed her dress over her hips, and smiled at herself before stepping inside. I had seen that smile on our wedding day. Watching her wear it for another man should have broken something else in me, but by then grief had hardened into clarity. I no longer wanted Natalie back. I wanted the lies to stop protecting her. "Ready?" Evelyn asked. "No," I said honestly. "But let's go." We took the second elevator and reached the 5th floor just as shouting began behind the door to suite 517. Camille's voice came first. "You told me she was unstable and stalking you." Natalie answered, "I don't even know who you are." Richard tried to speak over both of them, insisting there was a misunderstanding, but Camille opened the door before we knocked. She looked at Evelyn, then at me, and stepped aside. The suite smelled of champagne and cedar cologne. Rose petals had been scattered across the white duvet with such mechanical symmetry that I wondered whether hotel staff used a measuring tape. 2 glasses stood beside an ice bucket. Richard was wearing a dress shirt with the top buttons open. Natalie stood near the bed, one hand pressed against her chest, her face already drained of color. When she saw me, her mouth opened without producing a sound. Then Evelyn entered behind me. Richard's entire expression collapsed. "Evelyn," he said. She closed the door and replied, "That is still my name, despite the many fictional versions of me you've been distributing." I want you to imagine that room for a second: one married man, three women who had each been told a different story, and the husband he had dismissed as a harmless fitness trainer. Richard had spent months keeping us apart because separation was the engine of his deception. Once we stood together, he had nothing. Natalie looked from me to Evelyn and whispered, "Ethan, why are you here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, "but you already gave me the fundraiser story." She shook her head rapidly. "This isn't what it looks like." Camille laughed so sharply that Richard flinched. "He had rose petals delivered, sweetheart." "What alternative interpretation are you planning to use?" Richard stepped toward Evelyn, lowering his voice as if the rest of us were employees he could dismiss. "Evie, come outside with me. I can explain this privately." "No," she said. "You explain it publicly. Natalie believes you filed for divorce. Camille believes we've been separated for 14 months. I would love to hear which lie you plan to preserve." Richard turned on Natalie. "I never said I filed. I said I was preparing to transition out of the marriage." "You told me your attorney was handling it," Natalie said. Her voice rose with every word. "You said the Vale condo would be ours." Evelyn removed a document from her handbag and held it out. "The condo belongs to a family trust controlled by me. Richard cannot sell it, transfer it, or promise it to anyone." "But I'm sure the imaginary sunsets were beautiful." Natalie stared at the paper without taking it. Then she looked at Richard as if age itself had suddenly fallen onto his face. The silver at his temples no longer seemed distinguished. The careful confidence she had admired looked like what it really was: practice. "What about the company?" she asked. "You said you owned Caldwell Meridian." "He owns 49%, Evelyn said. "At the moment." Richard snapped, "Enough, Evelyn." She ignored him. "Our prenuptial agreement gives me the option to purchase 12 additional percentage points at a fixed valuation if documented adultery materially exposes the company to reputational or financial harm. Charging hotel suites for multiple affairs to a corporate card qualifies. My attorneys served notice this afternoon." For the first time, Richard seemed frightened rather than embarrassed. He moved toward Evelyn again, but I stepped between them. I did not touch him. I did not need to. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "You should stay where you are." He stopped. Natalie turned to me, and I watched her search my face for the devoted husband she believed she could still manipulate. "Ethan, I made a mistake," she said. "We need to go home and talk. A mistake is sending a private message to the wrong person. You plan to sell our house, take your half, and move into property that didn't belong to him." I was confused. "You were organized." I opened my folder and placed copies of the transfers on the table beside the champagne. "You spent $4,860 from marital funds on clothes, hotels, meals, and gifts connected to this affair." "My attorney has the statements. She also has the security footage from the night I found you at my club." Natalie went completely still. "You were there?" "I brought the water bottle you forgot. The one with the avocado sticker." Her hand rose to her mouth. She remembered seeing it on the counter when she returned home. She understood that every dinner, every cup of coffee, every ordinary conversation afterward had happened while I knew. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Not as long as you plan to leave me." Camille picked up her overnight bag. Her role was finished, and she had no interest in watching the rest. Before leaving, she looked at Natalie and said, "For what it's worth, he used the exact same line on both of us." Something about finally meeting a woman young enough to still believe in possibility but mature enough to understand him. Natalie's face twisted. Richard had apparently presented their age difference as something rare and profound. Discovering that it came from a script wounded her more visibly than learning about his wife. Camille left without saying goodbye to him. Richard poured himself a glass of champagne with a shaking hand. "Everyone has made their point," he said. "This spectacle is over." Evelyn took the bottle from him and set it down. "The spectacle will be over when the forensic accountant finishes tracing your expenses." Then she removed her wedding ring, placed it inside his empty glass, and added, "You will be staying somewhere else tonight." The house locks were changed at 5. He stared at the ring as if it were an explosive device. "You can't lock me out of my own house." "My attorney can explain the temporary property agreement." "She has been trying to reach yours." That was the instant Richard understood Evelyn had not discovered the affair that day. Her calmness came from having built an exit while he was busy building fantasies. Natalie grabbed her coat and headed for the door. I followed her into the hallway, not because I wanted to comfort her, but because I needed her to hear the final boundary without Richard turning it into another performance. She spun around near the elevator and said, "You humiliated me. You came to a hotel to sleep with a married man after lying to me." "I didn't manufacture the humiliation. I invited witnesses. You could have confronted me privately. You had 6 years of private access to me. You used it to lie." The elevator doors opened, but she did not enter. Tears gathered in her eyes. In another life, that sight would have made me abandon every boundary I had. That night, I finally understood that tears prove pain, not innocence. "Did you sleep with her?" Natalie asked, glancing toward the suite. "With Evelyn?" "No. That was the truth. But you wanted to." I thought about the rain outside the bookstore, our walks around Washington Park, and the unusual safety I felt when Evelyn asked a question and actually listened to the answer. "What I feel toward Evelyn is no longer your concern." Natalie slapped me. The sound cracked down the hallway. I did not move toward her. I took out my phone, photographed the red mark already forming on my cheek, and said, "That will be documented too." Her rage disappeared as quickly as it came. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly. "You're enjoying this," she said before the doors closed. "No," I answered. "I'm surviving it." When I returned to the suite, Richard was gone. Evelyn stood alone beside the window, looking down at the traffic on Colorado Boulevard. The rose petals were still scattered across the bed, ridiculous leftovers from a seduction that had never started. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Ask me in 6 months. Fair." She turned and noticed my cheek. Her expression sharpened. "Did Natalie do that?" "She made one last bad decision." Evelyn stepped closer and raised her hand, then paused before touching me. "May I?" I nodded. Her fingertips rested gently near the mark. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. I could feel the pull between us, intensified by months of betrayal and the adrenaline still moving through our bodies. It would have been easy to kiss her there. It also would have turned our worst night into the foundation of whatever came next. Evelyn lowered her hand first. "Counterfeit intimacy," she reminded me. "I remember." "Good." She smiled faintly. "Call your attorney. Then go somewhere your wife can't reach you tonight." I stayed at a hotel near Union Station and filed the divorce petition through Priya the next morning. Natalie returned to our townhouse to find a formal notice instructing both of us not to remove marital property. I blocked access to my personal business accounts, while the joint account remained untouched and fully documented. Her first messages were furious. She called me vindictive, controlling, and emotionally abusive. Then Richard stopped answering her, and the tone changed. She said she had been manipulated. She said the age difference had made her trust his judgment. She said he had exploited a difficult period in our marriage. By Sunday, she claimed the affair had been mostly emotional, apparently forgetting that I had watched her against the mirrored wall in Studio B. On Monday morning, she appeared at my club without an appointment. One of the front desk employees called me before letting her through. I met Natalie in the lobby where cameras and witnesses were present. Her eyes were swollen, and she wore the gray sweatshirt I had bought her during our first trip to Aspen. "Richard blocked me," she said. "I'm sorry to hear your married boyfriend lacks commitment. Please don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk to me like I'm disgusting. I haven't called you anything. I'm describing what happened." She lowered her voice. "He lied to me, Ethan. So did you. He said he loved me. And you believed that gave you permission to betray me? I thought we had grown apart." "You didn't tell me that. You told him." She began crying, and several people in the lobby looked away. "I made the worst mistake of my life." "No," I said. "You made dozens of choices. Calling them one mistake is how you avoid counting." Let me pause here, because this was the moment I finally saw the difference between remorse and consequences. Natalie was devastated, but nearly every sentence still centered on what she had lost: Richard, the imagined condo, the money from our house, the version of herself who believed she had traded upward. She did not ask what it had done to me. She asked whether I could stop the divorce. I told her no. She whispered, "Is it because you're with Evelyn now?" "It's because I will never again live with someone who considers my trust a weakness." She left the club without another word. The divorce took 7 months. It was neither cinematic nor clean. Real consequences usually arrive through emails, appraisals, scheduled calls, and invoices billed in 6-minute increments. Natalie initially demanded half the current equity in the townhouse without crediting my inherited down payment. Priya produced the transfer records. Natalie disputed several affair-related expenses, then withdrew the dispute when we requested full discovery of her personal credit card. The house was sold, my separate contribution was recognized, and the remaining marital equity was divided according to the settlement. I moved into a 2-bedroom condo near Berkeley Lake and turned the smaller room into an office for the training company I had wanted to build for years. Natalie's professional collapse happened more slowly. Richard had introduced her firm to 2 major hospitality clients, and when his corporate spending became the subject of legal proceedings, both projects were audited. Natalie had used internal presentations and work hours to arrange meetings with him, and one hotel receipt had been falsely submitted as a client development expense. Her employer did not fire her for having an affair. They fired her for falsifying an expense report and exposing the firm during an investor dispute. Word traveled quickly through Denver's small luxury design network. She found contract work, lost it after missing deadlines, and eventually moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Aurora. Her parents paid 3 months of rent after she exhausted most of her settlement trying to preserve the lifestyle Richard had encouraged. Richard's fall was worse. Evelyn exercised the infidelity provision in their prenup, increased her controlling stake, and removed him as managing partner after the board reviewed the corporate card expenses. He kept money, because men like Richard rarely become penniless overnight, but he lost the machinery that made him appear powerful. His name disappeared from the company website. The Cherry Creek house remained with Evelyn, and the Vale condo was never his to lose. 2 investors sued over undisclosed spending and conflicts of interest. Richard rented a furnished apartment downtown and began describing himself online as an independent strategic consultant. 6 months earlier, Natalie had imagined entering Denver society beside him. Now neither of them would acknowledge the other. She blamed him for deceiving her. He blamed her for attracting attention. Their supposedly sophisticated relationship survived exactly 11 days after the hotel confrontation. What happened between Evelyn and me was quieter. We did not turn the night at the Halcyon into the beginning of a romance. For almost 3 months, we saw each other only with lawyers present or over daytime coffee. Evelyn began therapy. I did too. We agreed that neither of us wanted to mistake shared damage for compatibility. She was 13 years older than me, established in a world of board meetings and charitable foundations, while I spent my days in training clothes helping people rebuild torn shoulders and exhausted confidence. Natalie had treated an age gap like proof of status. Evelyn and I treated ours like a practical question. We discussed children, retirement, health, money, social circles, and what each of us wanted before we even called our first dinner a date. Romantic, she joked one evening, nothing creates passion like comparing retirement horizons. I can make a spreadsheet, I offered. If you make a spreadsheet before dessert, I'm leaving. Our first real date was at a small Ethiopian restaurant on Colfax. No hidden hotel room, no fabricated business dinner, no one waiting at home for either of us. When I walked her to her car, she kissed me once and said, "That felt real." How can you tell? Because we didn't need anyone else to be hurt for it to feel exciting. We dated slowly after that. Some people judged the age difference. A few assumed I wanted her money. Others assumed she wanted a younger man to prove something after Richard. We stopped explaining ourselves to people committed to misunderstanding us. Evelyn never funded my business, and I never asked her to. What she gave me was more valuable. She challenged every excuse I made for staying small. With a loan secured against my own income and savings, I leased a modest 2,800 square foot space in Sunnyside and opened Mercer Performance and Recovery. Instead of competing with giant gyms, I specialized in strength training for adults recovering from injury, divorce, illness, or long periods of neglecting themselves. That idea came from my own experience. People did not always need someone shouting at them to push harder. Sometimes they needed a place where rebuilding was not treated as evidence that they had failed. Within the first year, I hired 2 trainers and a physical therapist. We reached 126 active clients by our anniversary. On the wall near reception, I placed the old avocado sticker from Natalie's water bottle inside a tiny black frame. I had peeled it off before the house was sold. No one else knew what it meant. To me, it represented the exact point when trust stopped being naivete and became a standard I would never lower again. Evelyn remained in my life, but she did not become my reward for defeating Natalie. She was her own person, with her own recovery and her own complicated reasons for choosing me. 2 years after the affair, we were still together, still unmarried, and still discussing the future honestly rather than racing toward a dramatic ending. She kept her house. I kept my condo. Some weeks we spent 5 nights together, other weeks work pulled us in different directions. We built something that had room to breathe. Natalie tried to contact me one last time after seeing photographs from the gym's opening. She sent a long email saying she was proud of me and wished she had supported my ambitions. Near the end, she wrote, "Sometimes I think Evelyn got the version of you I was waiting for." I read that sentence twice before replying. That version existed when we were married. You just decided he was not valuable until someone else recognized him. Then I blocked the address. I later heard Natalie had started dating a recently divorced restaurant manager close to her own age, but the relationship ended after she repeatedly checked his messages and accused him of hiding women from her. That was the final irony. She had once treated my trust as weakness. After Richard, she could no longer give trust to anyone. Her career never recovered to its former level. Many of her old friends distanced themselves after learning how much of the affair they had unknowingly helped conceal, and the glamorous future she had gambled on disappeared into ordinary rent, unstable freelance work, and a reputation she had built herself. I did not celebrate every bad thing that happened to her. Eventually, revenge stopped tasting like victory and started feeling like a room I had outgrown. The real win was walking into my own gym before sunrise, turning on the lights, and knowing nobody there had handed my life to me. Betrayal stripped away the future I thought I wanted, but it also forced me to see how much of myself I had been shrinking to keep another person comfortable. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be these 4 lessons. 1. When Natalie called my trust a weakness in Studio B, I learned that loyalty is not foolishness, giving repeated access to someone who abuses it is. Trust should be offered with dignity, not defended after the evidence destroys it. 2. My decision to leave that hallway quietly protected me more than any angry confrontation could have. Restraint gave me evidence, legal options, and time to understand the full deception before either of them could rewrite the story. 3. Richard's age, money, Portia, and polished confidence did not make him mature. Natalie confused status with character, while Evelyn showed me that real maturity looks like accountability, patience, and the ability to tell an uncomfortable truth without hiding behind performance. For Evelyn and I did not build our relationship on revenge alone. We waited, went to therapy, discussed our 13-year age difference honestly, and allowed the bond to survive without forcing it to become a trophy. A person should never be used as proof that you won. So tell me what you would have done at the hotel. Comment 1 if you think bringing Evelyn and Camille into the same room was justified. Comment 2 if you would have confronted Natalie privately the night you caught her, or comment 3 if you think walking away without revenge would have been stronger. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always find it incredible how far one story can travel. If this story kept you with me, leave a like and subscribe for more stories about betrayal, consequences, and rebuilding after everything falls apart. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional patterns, fully rewritten in Denver to create original content. Any resemblance to actual people or events is entirely coincidental.